citing the work of Dr. Mindy Pelz. I love her. She is so awesome. Fasting is absolutely safe and effective for women. And if you guys haven't seen Dr. Mindy or know who she is, her book is phenomenal, Fast Like a Girl. She teaches that women will run into issues with fasting during certain times of their cycle. So essentially, she's pro-fasting for women, but you got to do it right. You got to understand the cycle. What Dr. Mindy Pelz may not be familiar with, though, are the powerful fat mobilizing agents of certain peptides and products. Without improving the mobilization of fat, a woman will run into issues with fasting during certain times of the cycle, just like she explains. Trust me when I say this, I have clinics that service across the nation. Me and my healthcare practitioners help our patients achieve lasting levels of weight loss. And we've done deep fasting protocols on thousands and thousands of women, and we don't run into the issues to the same degree that Dr. Mindy talks about. Look, I'm not invalidating anything about what Dr. Mindy teaches. In fact, I'm going to be tagging her, and I'd love to be able to consult with her and see what she thinks and share some of these protocols with her regarding peptides that do have this ability to mobilize body fat, because I truthfully think that's the stressor, and we're going to get into it, why it's such an issue. Okay, so Dr. Mindy has really set the pace and set the tone for women, and really made them realize and made society realize that women should absolutely be fasting. And I couldn't agree more. I think evolutionarily speaking too, it's kind of silly to think that women were not subject to the same millions of years that men were, which involved periods of times where food was not available, and they had to develop the same sort of adaptation that men did as well. So let's take a step back though. Let's look at women's hormones for a second. And that's why I love this graph here, but men are easy. When we look at hormones and men, testosterone being the main potent male sex hormone, men have a 24-hour hormonal pattern, meaning that their hormones are going to be released in that pattern, same sort of flow every 24 hours. But as you can see here, women have a 28, on average, 28-day pattern. Whoa. You're talking 28 days before the pattern repeats. Very, very different. And we need to understand that, because understanding how that pattern works and which hormones are ebbing and flowing during different times give us better control and understanding of what's going on. So even this chart, we can make it even more simplistic. We have days 1 through 28. So if we look at the middle during ovulation, day 13 to 15. So day 13 to 15 is a point where hormones are the highest, right? And so as hormones are peaking, fasting can be an issue. And so it's important to understand that for Mindy, she'll teach women to take a step back and avoid any sort of longer fasting during day 13 to 15. Now, when we look at progesterone phase, which is day 18 to 28, this is where women need progesterone, that calming kind of anti-estrogen hormone. And it's the presence of progesterone that makes women feel good. Fasting will cause a cortisol spike, which will rob their bodies from producing progesterone and create the issues. And we're going to get into how that works here in a bit. So, what exactly is cortisol? Cortisol is a stress hormone. Specifically, cortisol is that fight or flight hormone. So, if you think about it, running from a tiger, right? You see a tiger and you need to run for your life. You want cortisol. Cortisol does a good job of, once it's released, causes a lot of glucose to then be shuttled and diverted to our skeletal muscles so that we can run as effectively as possible, as humanely possible, from the threat, from the tiger. Unfortunately, now we have issues in society known as chronic stress, and there are non-physically threatening issues, maybe some physically threatening, but essentially stress from the day-to-day and life is causing this cortisol secretion, which is causing excessive glucose production, and that leads to insulin resistance. And I mean, it'll derail your health. Okay, so cortisol, right? And by the way, I want to be clear: cortisol is not all bad. In fact, every man and women have a 24-hour cortisol pattern, right? This is where women do have a 24-hour cortisol pattern. So cortisol is high in the morning, and then it nice decrease as the day progresses. This is the rhythm that we want to have and should have. We want to have that cortisol pulse in the morning, gets our energy started, gets us feeling good. But now, as we discussed, various stressors and triggers in our life are causing these stressful situations, are causing these cortisol spikes. And when cortisol is released when it shouldn't be, this is what creates issues. And so, specifically, right, when we talk about fasting, and really what we're talking about is long fasting. Long fasting is a stressor, but we have to understand, like, not all stress is bad. Think about it for a second. When you weight train, and I always use weight training as an example because lifting weights is a process that most of us are familiar with. Nobody is arguing like, oh, weightlifting is bad, because we know it certainly can be bad if you do it correctly, but weightlifting is a stressor, and that stressor breaks down muscular tissue. You are literally tearing micro traumas to the muscle fibers. Well, it's those micro traumas that then triggers a stress response. And it's that stress response, in the case of weightlifting, which is hypertrophy, which is the growth in the size of the muscular fiber so that you can be stronger, and go on and on about the amazing benefits of weightlifting, but that's not what we're here to talk about. And so not all stress is bad. Positive stress is something that we need. And our body, and I love the way Dr. David Sinclair talks about this, but uh, the human body is a coping mechanism, right? It I truthfully believe that if we don't give our body stress, you have issues that arise too as well. Our genome can actually adapt and does adapt, right? This is a new branch of medicine that we're looking at called epigenetics, where the very expression of certain genes can be influenced by lifestyle choices, right? And I truthfully believe it's not only the bad, but the bad lifestyle choices leading to bad expressions. I also think it's the good lifestyle choices that can actually lead to a more positive expression. So, anyways, it's just, we got to understand that this is a big deal and it has some implications. So, getting back to women and getting back to the cycle. So, when you have cortisol that's released, specifically out of the two areas of the cycle that we talked about, again, as you can see here, day 13 to 15, that's one issue, but that's a short window. Okay. The progesterone phase, I think, is the bigger area where women really need to pay attention to. And it's the release of cortisol during that time that will interfere with your body's ability to make progesterone. That's the takeaway. And so lower levels of progesterone are what triggers and creates the shitty feeling that women go through. And we're all too familiar with it, those menstrual like symptoms. Well, if they had less cortisol, ultimately more progesterone, they wouldn't run into this, right? And we're not here to bash fasting, because fasting is not the only stressor. In fact, there's so many other stressors as well that are bad, and any one of those are going to do the same thing to the progesterone phase that fasting can do. But we're talking about fasting, and so this is where the conversation is going. But so the stressor creates the cortisol spike. The cortisol spike during the progesterone phase robs a woman of having the necessary levels of progesterone that they need, and that's why they feel like crap. Okay, so now let's take a step back, because in order to understand how we can avoid that, which is where I'm ultimately going, we do need to understand a concept called metabolic flexibility. So metabolic flexibility refers to the body's ability to alternate fuel sources, right? So carbohydrate burning and fat burning. Okay. So being metabolically flexible means your body is effective, is good at being able to burn body fat. Well, in order to burn body fat, you have to be able to mobilize it first and then utilize it for energy. Okay. Most of us are poor fat burners. Most of us have very unflexible metabolisms because you haven't done a lot of fasting and you haven't done a lot of ketogenic diets, right? Think about it. The only two real ways that you put your body into a fat burning, like you create that demand, is to fast or to only eat fat, to go on a ketogenic diet. And so most of us don't do that. And so we have poor metabolic flexibility. But that's important to understand, because when you think about fasting, right, we talked about weightlifting, and the stress response comes from the movement of the weights and breaking down the muscle tissues, the micro traumas. But fasting, especially for longer than 24 hours, 18, 24 hours or longer, and Mindy's a big fan of 36-hour fast. We put our women and men through 48-hour weekly fast, and we call that the FLOA protocol. And I'll put information on that in the description of this video. But the stressor, right, to your body is when you don't eat for that long period of time, is asking your body to mobilize its own body fat stores to meet the energy demand of your basal metabolic rate, of your total energy expenditure. So total energy expenditure really above basal metabolic rate. TEE is the total amount of calories that your body burns throughout the day. That's throughout all your activity, all your exercise, and your basal, which is what your body would burn if you didn't move, right? So TEE is everything. And you have that requirement of that many calories that you are consuming, and you won't have a change in your weight. So say for all intents and purposes, 2,000 calories, right? If you have a 2,000 calorie TEE and you don't eat for 24 hours, that's 2,000 calories that your body had to burn from its own stores. You only got about 18 to 20 hours of stored carbohydrates, which the glucose is stored as glycogen. Once you go through all that, because that's the primary source, your body's doesn't have any other carbs, right? It'll start making carbs, and one of the main areas that's making the glucose that it needs is from the stored fatty tissue, right? So you are asking your body to start burning fat, not asking it. You are forcing it, because it's not going to not do that. Getting into ketosis, a state where your body's producing ketone bodies, that's deep fat burning, and you get into that faster, by the way, when you're more metabolically flexible. But this is why when people, by the way, sort of side note, start fasting longer periods of time, maybe for the first time ever, run into issues because they're not fat adapted. And so the body, the brain is freaking out, because your brain is a small little area that requires about 25% of your glucose. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. Is not getting the steady levels of glucose that it normally needs and demands. And so it's freaking out. Okay. So the challenge, the stress from fasting is asking your body to mobilize its fat stores fast enough to meet its own energy demands. I just want to make sure we put all that together. Okay. So what do we do here? How do we handle this situation? How have we been so successful at helping women achieve and being able to fast during these windows and ultimately achieve lasting weight loss? I think it's because these fat mobilizing peptides, we always focus on aiding our women and men in mobilization of body fat, right? GLP-1 medications like semaglutide or tirzepatide, they're producing a massive caloric deficit. So does fasting. But mobilization is what we need to enhance, because if we're more able to mobilize fat, it's less of a stress. If it's less of a stress, there's less cortisol. If there's less cortisol, your body can still make progesterone. Now, this is all, there's no research behind any of this. It's just my own clinical observation, especially when I came across Dr. Mindy's work and saw what she was saying just made so much sense. But then I was like, how come our women don't have as much issue as hers? And I think it's because we aid them with these peptides and other options. So this peptide has recently been banned, and literally you have probably weeks left to still get your access to it. But AOD 9604 is a powerful fat mobilizing peptide. And specifically, AOD 9604 is actually a fragment of the human growth hormone, and it mobilizes body fat. Specifically, that's what it specializes in, is mobilizing body fat and making that body fat available for utilization, right? So love AOD. Very, very powerful. It's always been one of our tried and true peptides. But there's a few more. When we get into the category of growth hormone itself, because remember, AOD is a fragment of the human growth hormone, we have other peptides. Sermorelin and tesamorelin come to mind. Sermorelin was actually FDA approved for growth hormone insufficiency, both for children and adults. And you can get these all from compounding pharmacies, clinics like us. And tesamorelin is FDA approved for HIV patients for a medical condition known as lipodystrophy. And so both of these are going to increase the release of your body's own endogenous growth hormone, meaning growth hormone within, because growth hormone is produced and made and stored in the pituitary gland, a pea-sized gland near the front side of your skull. in your brain, and it's the signal to the pituitary gland, which causes the release of growth hormone. And so that's what we call them. There's a whole bunch of them, but we call them growth hormone releasing secretagogues or growth hormone secretagogues. So samorelin, tesamorelin are awesome. My favorite was always AOD, and like I said, you can still get it, but not for long. A new kid to the block called MOTS-c, and I have videos on each of these peptides on our YouTube page. You'll find them, but MOTS-c is a mitochondrial repairing peptide that literally is the same signal that your body in the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cells, releases in response to exercise. So this is cool because this improves metabolic flexibility, mobilizes body fat, and does so much more. So our program has always been getting women into a caloric deficit, improving the quality of food that they're eating. A lot of pillars that we do, but specifically, we help them mobilize body fat. Okay. So other supplements that I find help to do this as well. Nicotine gum, believe it or not, is powerful stimulus that helping both to prevent muscle loss, but also mobilizing body fat stores too as well, suppressing appetite. Supplements like Unamate, which is a powerful concentrated version of yerba mate tea, can also help too as well. So the takeaway, ladies, is you absolutely can fast. You should pay attention to your cycle. Regardless of what peptides, even with us, we still have some women that do run into issues. And so everything that Dr. Mindy teaches is great because it gives you a better idea. So if you're feeling crummy during those times on these peptides, that you take a break, work around it. Day 13 to 15, you can fast, before or after it, because our protocol has women fasting every single week for one long fast. Day 18 to 28, you're going to have to skip that week and move on to the next week. If you guys enjoyed this video, check out this video over here, GLP-1 Realities. This is an interview that I did where I was diving into all the various aspects of our program, why we have such a high level of success helping men and women achieve lasting weight loss through powerful medications and peptides and lifestyle coaching and support. We'll see you guys later.